In this video we'll be repairing the Panasonic 3DO FZ-10. I bought this 3DO as a spares and repairs on eBay for £70. In the item's description, the seller says that the console does not power up and the seller used a step-down converter. Let's take a look at the console. It is not in great shape. There are marks, dirt and grime all over the 3DO. And inside the CD tray too. So let's test to see if the system does not power on. As you can see, nothing. No power at all. The ready light normally should have a red light, but it doesn't light up. So we have a lot of work to do in this restoration. So without further ado, let's begin the restoration. So let's begin the restoration by turning over the 3DO, which reveals to us 7 Phillips head screws. One by one we remove each screw. And then turn over the 3DO again, which will allow us to remove the top lid, giving us our first look inside the 3DO. So the 3DO is not getting any power, so let's focus our attention on this area, which is the power supply, which is covered by this plastic shielding. Take a look at the plastic shielding, we can see there are burn marks. So where are these burn marks from? The location of the burn mark comes from this area, so let's have a look and see if there's any components that are burnt out. And as you can see, right next to the power connector and the fuse, we can see a burnt out component. This component is labelled on the PCB board as Z001. Taking a look at the schematic diagrams for the FZ-10's power supply, we can get more information about what this specific component is. This component is labelled as V10271U. Using this information, we can go online and find the data sheets for this specific component. This specific component is a transient surge absorber. This component is great at providing surge voltage protection by absorbing large surge currents. So this potentially gives us an idea of why the 3DO is not working. So more likely, if we replace this component, we can get the power supply and the 3DO back up and running. So let's now remove the PSU. First we need to remove the power jack and the power switch. These are held down by 2 taps which need to be pressed down, which allows both of them to pop off. Once that's done, we then remove the ribbon cable and then remove the 2 screws holding the power supply down. And then we can remove the power supply. So let's take a look at the power supply. Now to remove the component, we need to flip the power supply over and then locate the solder points to the burnt out component. We next need to desolder it away from the PCB board. We first tin the points with new solder and slowly remove it from the other side of the board. We then use solder braid to wick up all the old solder and clean the area with some isopropyl alcohol. So this is the burnt out component that we've just removed, and we're going to replace it with a brand new one. We put a new component in the place of where the original one was and then solder it. We then cut the excess legs and then clean the area with IPA. And with that done, I now turn my attention to the capacitors on the power supply. These capacitors are almost 30 years old. It is best to see if they're still performing to spec. As you can see using this multifunctional tester, that the values on this capacitor are way over, almost 3 times the value. So that tells us that all of these capacitors need to be replaced. And here are the replacement capacitors that we'll be using. But first we need to remove this metal piece that basically covers the large capacitor. By desoldering both legs, which allows us to then remove it. And allow us to start the process of desoldering the big capacitor. And with the old capacitor now removed, we can now install our new capacitor. And due to the size of this capacitor, we will no longer need the metal shielding. We continue the process of removing the old capacitors and replacing them with brand new ones. And with all the new capacitors now installed, we give both sides of the board a clean using isopropyl alcohol. And with all the new capacitors now installed on the power supply, we now turn our attention to the main board, specifically looking at the CR2032 battery, which maintains the onboard SRAM chip which holds the saves of games. I use a multimeter to see if we've got any power left in the CR2032 battery, but as you can see, the battery is completely dead. So that is the next thing we need to replace. There are two screw posts that hold the CD drive in place that we need to remove. To do this, we need to flip the console back over and take a look at these four holes here. Two of them hold the actual CD drive with these white plastic clips. Using a Phillips head screwdriver and pushing down will release these clips. Once these clips are released, we flip the console back over while carefully holding the CD drive and remove any of the clips which still remain. We then disconnect the first visible cable to the CD drive. Peel back the tape which holds the plate to the drive and then remove it. And underneath the CD drive we disconnect the ribbon cable and the connector. At the back of the CD drive there are two more ribbon cables that we need to disconnect. With that done, the CD drive can now be removed. We next need to remove the 7 screws located around the main board. And with all the screws now removed, we can now remove the RF shield. To remove the main board, we need to remove the expansion port cover. And with that done, we can now remove the main board. The next issue I want to address on the 3DO is the dead CR32 battery which we need to replace. To do this, we need to flip the board over and to desolder all 3 legs away from the board. With the old battery now removed, we can now drop in our brand new battery holder. This will make replacing the CR32 battery in the future a lot easier. To hold the battery holder in place, I use some masking tape and then solder the holder to the main board. Once that's done, we can remove the tape and place in our brand new CR2032 battery. The next thing we're going to do is replace all of these capacitors on the board. If I've already replaced the capacitors on the power board, then it'll be best to just replace all the capacitors even on the main board. One by one we replaced all the old capacitors. And replaced them with brand new ones. All the capacitors I'll be using are high quality capacitors. The overall process of replacing all the old capacitors and putting new capacitors in took several hours, it did. And after several hours, the whole recapping process was done. Every capacitor on the main board was replaced with brand new high quality capacitors, keeping the system alive for another 30 years. So let's now move on to the next stage, which is cleaning the shells of the 3DO, which has dirt, marks and grime all over it. So let's begin by removing all the marks and all the grime using IPA. So with the first round of cleaning now done, let's now move on to washing the shells. First we're going to remove the CD latch, which is held down by two hooks. To do this we need to turn the 3DO over and use a set of tweezers to pinch the hooks, which will allow us to push the latch out of the shell. Next we need to remove the spring for the CD tray mechanism. This can be a bit fiddly, but using tweezers really helps with the process. With that done, we then remove the bottom shielding, which is held down by double-sided tape. To help the process, I use IPA, which basically loosens the glue and helps us to remove the bottom shielding. And with that now removed, we can now begin the process of cleaning the metal shielding and then cleaning both shells. And we do this by giving both shells a good scrub in the shower. And with both shells now washed, we leave them to dry for around 24 hours. While we wait for the shells to dry, let's now focus our attention on the drive. As you can see, the drive is very dirty, so we're going to clean it using a cotton bud with some IPA. With that done, we then put the protective plate back on and flip the drive over. And we are now going to focus on replacing the old grease on the drive rails and put brand new grease on them. First we need to remove all the old grease on both rails using the cotton bud. Once both rails are clean, we then apply brand new grease to them. And with the fresh grease now applied to both rails, we now turn our attention back to both shells. 24 hours later, and here is the results. Both shells are looking amazing. All the dirt, marks and grime completely gone. And with that done, let's finally reassemble the 3DO. Originally there was double-sided tape underneath the bottom shell. I'm going to apply brand new double-sided tape and place them to the areas where they originally were. And place the bottom shielding on top of it. Next we reinstall the main board with its brand new capacitors and its replacement drop-in clock battery. Next we reinstall the top shield, and then we reinstall all the screws around the main board and shield. Next we reinstall the power supply and screw down the power supply with its 2 screws. And then reinstall the power jack and power switch. And then we reinstall the ribbon cable. We next turn our attention to the CD drive by reinserting all the cables around the drive. We then reattach the CD drive plate and reinsert the screw posts. We then put the plastic shielding back onto the power supply and then place the light leading panel back onto the shield. I also created a note that I placed on the shielding with the date when the recapping took place. Next we focus on the top lid. We reattach the CD tray latch and the spring and apply fresh grease around the spring. And finally we put the top lid back on the 3DO and screw it down with the 7 screws. And here it is, the fully restored Panasonic 3DO FZ-10, and it is looking amazing. All the dirt, grime and marks all gone, leaving a fully clean system. So let's power on the system. And as you can see, the 3DO turns on. So let's play some games. And one of the first games I try is one of my favourites, Bust the Move. And the next game I try is a fantastic game on the 3DO, Need for Speed. So that's it. I hope you've enjoyed this video. And until next time, bye for now.